From the National Catholic Register, this is Register Radio, bringing light and clarity to the news and topics that affect your life.
The 46th Annual March for Life drew a crowd of more than 300,000 to Washington, D.C. under the theme of Unique from Day One. It went barely noticed by the mainstream media, which was focused on stirring controversy and dubious charges of racism. What actually happened at this year's march? This week on Register Radio, we talk with Catherine Hadro of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. Plus, Father Raymond DeSouza gives us his take on the scandals in the church and how they're impacting the leaders at the top. I'm Matthew Bunson, the Register Senior Editor and co-host for Register Radio. My co-host, Jeanette DeMello, Editor-in-Chief of the National Catholic Register, is away on maternity leave. Well, that the secular media should once again ignore one of the largest national marches in the country was not surprising. What was shocking was that the story they focused on instead, the accusations of racism against the Covington Catholic high school students, was more than just another journalistic embarrassment. It became a sadly revealing moment of division, imprudence, anti-Catholicism, and vitriol. To talk about the march and what really happened at the march, I'm delighted to be joined by Catherine Hadro. Welcome back.
It's a joy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, we have you on too rarely, so I'm delighted that you could take the time. I know as we record this, as we're talking today, you're actually preparing to head to California.
That's right. It's the first time I'll be going to the Walk for Life West Coast in San Francisco. So I'll be leaving tomorrow morning, based on when we're recording this. Really looking forward to it. Don't really know what to expect so much, but looking forward to seeing what it's like and how it compares and looks like compared to the March for Life.
Well, there's something important that a lot of people don't think about, and that is that the pro-life movement, the pro-life marches, walks, this is a global phenomenon now.
Absolutely. And I do want to reiterate that the March for Life is this, it's really, they're such a leader for global marches as well. A lot of people turn to see the marches in Washington, how it's organized, the messaging, the crowds, and they model a lot of times their marches after that.
Now, in this particular year, and last year included, you weren't actually on the mall. You were in studio here in Washington, D.C., because you were essentially the anchor for our live coverage.
I know. I was so close yet so far. We're just down the street from where the march was taking place, but they did keep me in studio this year along with Father Patrick Mary, my co-host. I think they kept the Floridians in the studio just because it was warmer. But
understood. It was a good day to be in studio.
Yes. But we were still able to watch it, watch the crowds from our cameras and watch them filling up the streets and watch the rally and all the marchers afterwards.
And then tossing, I know, to Damon Owen.
Exactly.
And
Teresa Tomeo. Yes.
You did a magnificent job, and not just being nice. I mean, based on everything that we're hearing from all over the place, it was a magnificent job of anchoring. What sort of preparation goes into covering something like this for 6 hours? A lot.
Yeah, it was a lot, and you were a part of it. And I just want to extend my gratitude. You were a big part of it, and I really want to extend my gratitude there. But as you mentioned, it's about 6.5 hours. We do get that 1 hour break in between when there's the actual rally. Right. So all the cameras go to the speakers there. But for months, we're working on it. It's affectionately referred to as the network Super Bowl in a way, just because of the massive production. But my producer, Kate Scanlon, and I lined up a guest in studio whom we rotated every 30 minutes. So it required a lot of just interview prep, interview prep for all these different guests with their unique personalities and gifts and area of expertise. And then also, it's live TV. Mm-hmm. You can only prepare so much. And so a lot of prayer. Throughout the broadcast, right before, I asked Father Patrick Mary, okay, Father, can you please give me a blessing right before we went to air, because we needed that. And to have a priest right next to my side definitely brought along a lot of peace as well.
I can imagine, yeah. A shout out to Kate Scanlon, because I know that she worked really hard on this, as well as the whole crew that from here in D.C., as well as the crew that came up from Birmingham.
Absolutely. And it's just, we prepare, but then we get bombarded the week of the March for Life, which is a very good thing, but a lot of people are reaching out. It's this massive pro-life week. The day before the March for Life, I had the honor of moderating a panel discussion at the March for Life conference, which always takes place the day before. And then the day after the March for Life, I moderated a panel at the 20th annual Cardinal O'Connor Conference at Georgetown University. So it's this big pro-life week. So a lot of just prayer and rest ahead of time.
Who were some of the other panelists?
So at the Cardinal O'Connor Conference, there was George Weigel, St. John Paul II's biographer, Jeannie Mancini, president of the March for Life. So she joined the day after her busiest day of the year. So she could do it. I could do it. Stephen Aden, who is the chief counsel over at Americans United for Life, and this professor by the name of Dr. Daniel K. Williams, I believe the University of West Georgia, and his specialty is the history of the pro-life movement and looking at how the pro-life movement really began as this civil rights cause and only over time has come to be more seen as this religious kind of effort.
Yeah. Well, to that very point, there has been an attempt to sort of controversialize to make this march in particular. Every year they either ignore it, but this year there was a lot of controversy surrounding one set of videos of the Covington High School kids, of course, that was used by the media to deflect and ignore the march. How frustrating is that for someone like you who, here you are, anchor of live coverage, but also with EWTN Pro-Life Weekly?
It was just heartbreaking. I mean, and I know that story is continuing to develop day after day, but the fact that there was, you and I have been talking about this form of distraction media, because the truth is that is not the March for Life. I just want to share pictures and videos with everyone of the young faces who filled the sea, who were a sea of a crowd in the streets, who were hopeful and joyful, to the contrast of Roe v. Wade. That's the news story. The news story is that we have about 1 million legal abortions in the United States every year. And year after year, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people fill these streets. That's the story. And the fact that we're seeing this Covington story everywhere, I mean, that's a distraction from what the March for Life really is.
Yeah, and for those of us who are of a certain age, I can remember when Roe v. Wade first was enacted. I was living in Hawaii at the time, and I can remember vividly. In fact, you asked me about this on the air. Right. My very first experience with the pro-life, the March for Life. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experience.
Yes. So my first March for Life was 9 years ago, and I was a freshman at Florida State University. I definitely at that time considered myself pro-life, but it was not an issue that really mobilized me. It wasn't an issue I felt prepared to speak about. I started to attend Catholic Student Union a little bit, and being a freshman at a big public university, you kind of want to strike this balance between, being faithful to God, but you don't want all your classmates to know that. So this really kind of that time there as a freshman at FSU, but my roommate and best friend was going to attend the March for Life, so I went with her, mainly because I didn't want to be alone over the weekend. I didn't want to be bored and without my best friend, so it came along over a 15-hour bus drive. It's 50 students crammed onto this bus. We get off. It's cold for a Florida girl. I mean, a January winter in D.C.
Time off from purgatory for somebody from Florida.
There we go. And I very quickly learned, this is not a field trip. This is not just a fun weekend with some friends. This is a pilgrimage. And we went to what was then the Verizon Center, now is the Capital One Arena, for the Youth Rally and Mass for Life. We prayed the rosary. We received the sacrament of confession. We went to Mass, received the Eucharist. And from Mass, went out onto the streets to walk towards the National Mall. And it was this beautiful image for me because, gosh, it felt like we were almost soldiers for Christ in a way. We were receiving him, and now we're going to carry him with us through these streets in peaceful protest against legalized abortion. And then to look around me and see all these young people, I just remember thinking clearly, I'm not alone. I'm not alone. And I know right now there's a lot of discussion and talk about, all these young kids coming to the March for Life, they don't really care about the cause. They just want a day off. I'll admit I had some social incentives for coming, but God still used that. And 9 years ago thinking, okay, I'm not alone in my pro-life view. Maybe I really should speak up for the life issue. And now to think, oh my goodness, I had the honor of, I work at EWTN. I had the honor of hosting our network's coverage of the March for Life. I'm very publicly
Something
speaking.
that probably did not remotely occur to you 9 years ago.
No, and something that I think is, I don't know, I always think about, and I always want to share this with young people, is this show Pro-Life Weekly did not exist when I was in college. How could I have dreamed I would have worked there? You know, you don't know the plans that God has for you, but you can look back and see how He's been preparing you. And I look back at my first March for Life 9 years ago, and I'm able to see how God was starting to help prepare me for today.
To the point, too, that here we've just had this March for Life, but the cause has to go on, setting aside distractions, setting aside whatever controversies there might be.
Right.
And that becomes, it strikes me, especially important given what just happened this week in New York.
Yes. So now in New York, abortion is legal up until birth. And we're seeing just great celebration among the New York Senate, from the New York governor, which is just devastating and heartbreaking.
It struck me as rather ghoulish to watch.
Yes, and to see yes, and you know they're celebrating it publicly in the city, and so it's a reminder that the March for Life is this beautiful event. It's this highlight of the year for the pro-life movement in a beautiful way, but we need to take this energy and use it every single week. And so I know, for example, on EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, we every week give a call to action so that every week you are mobilized and you know how you can advance the culture of life. This is something we need to be. We have a responsibility, frankly, as Catholics, to be monitoring what's going on when it comes to the life issue, and how can we make a difference, and how can we educate ourselves, inform ourselves, so we can more boldly speak about it.
Yeah, peacefully,
yes,
lovingly,
right,
to speak about it.
Exactly.
And do you see the movement of what is a pretty radical decision in New York to enact this type of a legislation? Sort of a reflexive action against what they see is a cause that they're losing.
That's a really powerful way to put it. And historically, New York has been very extreme on the abortion issue. They legalized abortion before Roe v. Wade was ruled. So we're seeing this alarmism from abortion advocates. You know, we're seeing this alarmism and these extreme actions being taken, which really is this culture of fear. There's this culture of fear, which speaks to your point that we need to speak about the life issue in a peaceful and loving way, and with the truth, so that, because there will be these knee-jerk reactions and these worst-case scenarios that you hear, but we need to know how to speak to those misconceptions lovingly.
We do. Well, Catherine, thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to talking with you again.
Oh, it was my privilege and joy. Thank you, Dr. Bunson.
Safe travels always. Well, when we come back, I talk to Register contributor Father Raymond DeSouza on why this is the end of what he calls papal deference. This is Register Radio.
Don't miss a moment of 2019. Try 6 issues of EWTN's National Catholic Register today for free. Award-winning journalism that goes beyond what you'll find from any secular news service. With the Register, you'll get the real story behind the events that unfold over the course of the year. Try the Register for free today and get it delivered to your home, office, or parish. Want to continue your subscription after your free trial? Just pay $49.95 and you'll get a total of 26 issues filled with spiritual insights on world events, along with compelling Catholic news and information. To get 6 free issues, order online at ncregister.com/NYR or call 800-421-3230 and mention code 919-NYRA. The National Catholic Register. Read faithfully.
Let's return to Register Radio on EWTN.
Welcome back to Register Radio. I'm Matthew Bunson, the Register Senior Editor and co-host for Register Radio. My co-host, Jeanette DeMello, Editor-in-Chief for the National Catholic Register, is away on maternity leave. My next guest recently wrote, "The age of deference has been winding down for several generations. The days of when officials would kneel during brief meetings with the Holy Father and he would take all of his meals alone have long ended. Even when bishops were summoned for private castigation, such as the Dutch bishops in 1981 or the Australian bishops in 1998, public deference was maintained. That is no longer the case." Well, Father Raymond DeSouza is a regular contributor and a very popular one for the National Catholic Register, and he penned those words. Welcome back to the Register Radio, Father.
Matthew, good to be with you, and we miss Jeanette, but for good reasons. I'm sure her family doesn't miss her, so that's for the best.
She'll be back soon for listeners who have been missing her, as I've been flying solo for some months now. But your piece, you have two pieces, actually, that dovetail almost perfectly at the Register. You can find them at ncregister.com. The first is Sexual Abuse and the End of Papal Deference. And the other is The Case of the Disappearing Cardinals. Now, for the record, the Case of the Disappearing Cardinals does not involve Sherlock Holmes.
Right.
In a way, though, it is something of a mystery that you help explain. So this really is more and more part of the fallout of the sexual abuse crisis, but also just the changing culture, isn't it?
It's both. On the first point about deference, I make a point about, if you had showed up at the Vatican in the time of John the 23rd, St. John the 23rd, or his predecessor, Pius the 12th, the papal court, the way that people would act in the Holy Father's presence was much more formal and much more with greater deference. You and I, Matthew, were there covering the Youth Synod, and of course that indelible image of the boy in the Levi's T-shirt on the grand high papal altar of St. Peter's Basilica greeting the Holy Father was one that was something that would not have been envisioned, I think, in previous ages, and a vision I wish I could blot out of my memory, but alas, it's there. So there's that been going on, but what I'm talking about is something a little different, is that in the culture of if you want to say the church, the hierarchy, pardon me, even when there were very strong disagreements, there was amongst bishops always a very deferential language, posture, one might say, towards the Vatican, Rome, and of course the Holy Father himself. And I was commenting that several things in the last year have seemed to have changed that, and the incident that started me thinking about that was that a delegation of the bishops of Chile, their sort of conference leadership, came to Rome on the first anniversary of the Pope's visit to Chile last year, January 2018, a visit that went very badly. And that whole story is well known. And during the year, when the Pope reversed course on his decisions in Chile, he really blamed the Chilean bishops in a very harsh way, saying they hadn't informed him properly and they were guilty of many things. That itself was a kind of end of deference, I mean, this sort of public dressing down. But the bishops kind of took it. They didn't protest. And when they were summoned to Rome and they all resigned together as a kind of a gesture to sort of move forward in the Chilean crisis, they didn't object. They didn't complain. That's changed. They showed up in January and they gave open interviews saying that they were there to restore trust with the Holy Father, to rebuild trust with the Holy Father. That I can't think of another episode where any group of bishops have arrived implying, or in this case not really implying, but directly saying that the Vatican had damaged the trust that they had in him. And of course that followed not long after what our readers and listeners in the United States would remember back in November, where you had at the American Bishops' meeting public criticism of some of the decisions that the Holy See had taken. And of course the president of the American bishops, Cardinal DiNardo from Houston, said, I don't understand this decision about delaying some votes. I'm puzzled by it. I don't like it. And other people said more things along that line. Also unusual. So whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I mean, if it's more honest and more frank, that might be good. Maybe it'll lead to better and more sincere exchanges. But at the same time, when you have an institution, and the church is certainly that, where that those public forms of courtesy, public forms of at least apparent agreement, public forms of deference are eroded, it's not an unambiguous thing. And so I wanted to call attention to that because I think that's something that's new. And, next month they'll be having this big sexual abuse summit in Rome, and, what will be the ethos around that remains to be seen, but it's not going to be the same as it would have been 5 years ago.
Well, the use of the term frank and fruitful in describing Vatican News, how the meetings went, strikes me as a pretty radical departure from the usual way of expressing things. Yes. I noticed in none of those statements did it ever use the traditional Vatican word of serene.
Serene or cordial sometimes was used. In diplomatic circles, it's sort of a half joke, half reality, is when there's a big dispute, they talk about diplomats having a full and frank exchange, which usually means that there was a very heated disagreement.
And war often follows.
And so, to say that the official Vatican statement said that there was a frank exchange, that's unusual. Usually you say, as you point out, it's serene or cordial and so forth. But I think they had to say something a little bit more than the usual, because what was striking was not what the bishop said in private, which of course I don't know, but the interviews that they gave very openly, saying that that this was, and I think the president of the Bishops' Conference of Chile said, "Look, what we're here to do is restore trust, and it's a long process. This is not a quick fix."
And you write, too, that the castigation model preferred by the Holy Father, whether speaking to the Roman Curia or writing to the U.S. bishops, depends upon the bishops accepting it without protest. And that, as you note, then, seems to be long gone now.
Well, we've seen that, some people have said that the Holy Father, in a way, is like an old-time spiritual director. And spiritual directors sometimes can be very challenging to the people they're, speaking with. Usually, of course, that's in private. Sometimes being very sharp with them to provoke a reflection and a challenge. And the Pope has used that several times in public, with the Roman Curia, certainly with the Chilean bishops last year. And that same kind of letter, sort of public castigation with an invitation to reflection, was what he wrote to the American bishops for their retreat earlier this month in Chicago, or near Chicago. My sources there told me that it was not well received. Now, castigations aren't really intended to be well received, so you can say that's not really that's not a problem. But interesting, they said that none of the discussions and the preacher, Father Cantalamessa, they just sort of set that text aside. They didn't really reflect on it. And there were some, if you want to say, irritants about the nature of that text, and certainly the Chilean bishops. So it might be that if, for example, which I obviously don't know, and really no one does, I suppose, outside the inner circle, what model the Pope chooses to use in February for the meeting of the presidents of all the different bishops' conferences. But if that model, the castigation and invitation to reflect model, was used, as you point out, it requires the people being castigated to accept it. And maybe they'll be less willing to do so. I don't know, but we're seeing things shift, and it's something to keep an eye out on.
Well, part of that shift is the fact that we now have so many members of the College of Cardinals, certainly in the United States, but increasingly around the world, who find themselves in legal but also public relations pickles in rather difficult situations. And that's I know the thrust of your piece on the case of the disappearing cardinals. That we seem to have we're running out of cardinals who can actually appear in public, and I don't even mean that as a joke.
I don't know if we're running out of them. There's a lot, but we have fewer than we used to, and it wasn't really thought to be an issue. If you invited a cardinal somewhere, you wouldn't think, would there be a problem with that at a Catholic gathering? And of course, last week at the March for Life, there are two big masses at the March for Life. There's the one at the Shrine, which is always celebrated by whichever bishop is in charge of the pro-life committee, and that's a enormous event. But the biggest mass of the year in Washington, it might even be the biggest mass of the year in the United States on an ongoing basis. I don't know. It's the 20,000 people who were at the hockey arena, and that's always celebrated the morning of the March for Life by the Archbishop of Washington, and so Cardinal Wuerl has done that for a long time. And it was announced on Wednesday that he wouldn't be there. He wouldn't be the celebrant of the Mass, and he wasn't there for the Mass. He disappeared. Why? Because earlier that week he had conceded in a letter to his priest that when he said last summer that he didn't know or hadn't even heard rumors about Cardinal McCarrick's misconduct, never even heard rumors. He didn't mean to be imprecise, as it said. He didn't mean to lie about that, but he just forgot that he had actually reported Cardinal McCarrick to the Apostolic Nunciature about 18 months before he himself became Archbishop of Washington. And now it's obviously possible he could have forgotten about it, and nothing in the interim had, jogged his memory. But most people seem to think that it's unlikely that anybody would forget that. And Cardinal Wuerl, of his many, whatever his failings might be, he's an enormously intelligent, careful, well-prepared man. So people thought that it was unlikely he just forgotten about this rather important item, and so it was thought by the cardinal himself or the nuncio, or I'm not sure who, but that it'd be better if he didn't appear in public. And so what was always done, the cardinal archbishop celebrating the Mass, wasn't done. And what I thought was remarkable about it is that everybody said, oh yeah, that makes sense, and it was done very smoothly, and that's happened. I made a few other examples in the last year, Cardinal Mahoney, Cardinal Farrell, who similarly canceled public appearances because they thought they couldn't appear without creating a lot of embarrassment or awkwardness. And I contrast that to what happened back in 2008 and 2005, when, in the case of Cardinal Bernard Law, retired Archbishop of Boston, they didn't want him in public, but they couldn't make him disappear.
Right.
But now, so that's a 10-year span in which something that was thought very difficult to do, if not impossible to do, is now done very routinely. And it's the fourth time it's happened in the last 12 months with American cardinals.
And that strikes me as something that we're likely to continue to see. And I know one of the reactions that people had in the D.C. area was not so much that he stepped aside, but why it took him so long to do so.
Okay.
Well, Father, I'm very grateful, as always, for your time, and I look forward to your next column. Hopefully it won't have a mysterious title, but whatever it is, I can guarantee you a lot of people are going to be reading it.
Very good. Well, we're always grateful for our readers, so thanks, Matthew, for having me on.
My thanks to Father Raymond DeSouza and to Catherine Hadro, and wish her safe travels as she promotes the culture of life. Thank you so much for joining me this week on Register Radio. Remember, for more news and commentary, go to ncregister.com. Remember also to go to our podcasts. On behalf of my co-host, Jeanette DeMello, and our producer, Jeff Burson, I'm Matthew Bunson. Until next week, please take care and God bless. This is Register Radio.